to me. So we'll have a couple of presenters followed by questions and answers, and then an open discussion. So this is where we're located, our group. It started last year, and it followed some research projects by Water Environment Research Foundation and Water Research Foundations. So we're looking to basically three topics: effective change management, process improvement, and technology integration. So the topics today will be related to these things. So I will start the first presentation, and I'll let Suzanne introduce herself and then go into the topic.
Okay, thanks, Cello. Hello, everybody. I'm Suzanne Littlejohn, and I'm in the UK, in England more specifically, and I work for a central government body called the Environment Agency. I've worked for the Environment Agency for 24 years, and I'll explain a little bit more about that organisation shortly. I've got a background in environmental science, environmental management, project management, and now business management and asset management. So I've got sort of quite a strong theme running through my career, and asset management is really what I'm focused on now in terms of my day job, and how processes support our asset management in the Environment Agency is what I'm going to talk through today. It's a very complex organisation, so I'll just run through that a bit, and I'll talk about how understanding our processes is the key to helping us improve how we manage our processes. So next slide, please, Shadow. Right, so you can see some facts and figures there, so I'm not going to go into that too much. Essentially, we cover England with a population of about 57 million people and just over 51,000 square miles, so quite small by comparison to the US. That's about 130 kilometers squared. We've got 13,500 staff, and we were brought into being in 1996 through an act of parliament, and so we've got various regulatory and national roles in England around flood risk management, but also water resources regulation, navigation management, and other things like that, you know, and actually including nuclear regulation and large industrial site regulation. So our assets in the Environment Agency are mostly around supporting management of flood risk and navigation. So next slide, please, Cello. So here's our biggest asset. Actually, it's probably one that is the most significant because it protects London, but it also is hugely significant in terms of the economy of the country, actually, because it protects a relatively small area and 1.42 million people who live and work in that area. But actually, the consequences of central London flooding would be catastrophic for our country. Huge impacts on, you know, in terms of cost and on infrastructure and our government. So London on the east coast of England is quite low lying actually, and is vulnerable to tidal surges, and with uncertainty around climate and sea level change, it's increasingly vulnerable. So back in the 1950s through to the 1980s, a lot of work was done to develop the structure that you see here. The Port of London is one of the biggest ports in England, so actually it's still a working port. Most of the port activities are towards the sea from this structure, but there's still a lot of navigation up and down this river to the City of London up here. So you can see that actually this barrier still needs to allow rivers, boats and river traffic, but it also needs to be able to stop when it closes the tidal surge. So it was designed, I think, to close 2 or 3 times a year, It actually now closes 6 or 7 times a year, and last year actually closed 13 times. So the impact of sea level rise is having an impact. Next slide, please, Cello. So obviously that's a relatively small area in the context of our country. So we've got a huge range of other assets across the country. The rest of the east coast of England tends to be quite low-lying, so we've got a number of other tidal barriers on a lot smaller scale up and down that coastline. And towards the west and inland, we've got a lot of big cities with big rivers running through them. So high rainfall impacts those cities. So we've got a range of things from traditional walls and embankments, pumping stations with mechanical and electronic components and large pumps, to demountable barriers, which the infrastructure is all there ready to put in place. And essentially it's like a Lego kit. The teams go out and deploy the barriers when our flood warning systems warn that there's going to be a large flooding event. We've also got temporary barriers as well, which are much more flexible and movable to where a problem will emerge. And navigation assets are, again, a different type of asset with some common elements. And the other asset families, as we call them, tend to have arisen through quite different organisational reasons. So we're now trying to bring them together a bit more. We've got, as we cover the whole country, there's a lot of operational areas. There's 15, I think, operational areas who tend to have historically done things a bit differently. So next slide, please, Cello. So part of managing that big group of assets across a large country, and some of them with very high consequence, is understanding what the future demand looks like. And that's not just around uncertainty around climate impacts and sea level, but also around the deteriorating condition of our assets, as well as water generally, the water environment generally, because our demand for water resources is increasing and our availability is decreasing. You can see that we've also had quite a lot of investment in our capital infrastructure, which is new assets, but as well that is including increasing the ability of the assets to sustain the same level of protection where there's more demands on them with sea level and climate change. But actually our revenue or our maintenance budget is staying quite low. So that presents quite a lot of challenges as well in terms of how we manage this asset base and meet future demand. So next slide, please, Cello. So all of these conditions, our national role, the consequences of failure of across our asset base, but some of them in particular, and the need for fairness and equity across how we protect communities across the country, and the number of customers and stakeholders, some of them with quite conflicting requirements, means that we've got a lot of governance considerations and a lot of work we have to do to demonstrate that we are providing value for money to the taxpayer, as well as managing the risk. So next slide, please, Cello. So starting to get a little bit more into asset management, started to focus in on that. We've got some driving principles around climate resilience, systems-based approach, target operating model. And I think these are probably quite common themes across many organisations. In terms of meeting the future challenges, we've set ourselves the ambition to become a world-class asset management organisation. We've got accreditation to the International Asset Management Standard, the ISO standard 55001. We're focusing on building our operations, maintenance and response capabilities, as well as kind of the organisational capabilities that go along with that, risk management, decision making, etc. And we're also looking at, given the figures and the challenges on public finances, I think, across every country, we're experiencing that too. And I think being able to increase efficiency and deliver value for money is, an ongoing pressure as well. So this is the kind of environment within which we're looking to improve our asset base. Next slide, please, Cello. So we have an asset management strategy. This is a new strategy, a new version of the previous strategy which we had. This version was published in 2023. So it was widely consulted on and boils the requirements of the organisation and the country down to 4 really key ambitions you can see here. And then if you go to the next slide, please, Charlie, we start to focus in a little bit on how improving our processes and managing our processes is starting to support that strategy. So things like efficiency, safety and reliability. The more that you understand about your ways of working, the more less uncertainty that you have in terms of, and repeatability that you have in terms of how you deliver your work. Going forward, thinking about digital by design, designing everything we do with a view to maximizing our capability in terms of being able to make use of our data and opportunities in the digital sector. So there's a lot there that we can then start to look at in terms of benefits we can see through improving how we're managing our processes. So next slide, please. So being honest about our current position is quite an important starting point. So my work has been very much around looking at how we can measure performance around our processes, and then also look at how we can get a better grip on how we manage our processes. So a lot of what I found is that we don't not have process mapping and modelling. We've got a lot of it. It's just that it's quite organised and you can't really see the forest from the trees. We've got inconsistencies, duplication, countermanding. It's difficult to control and measure our processes. So in order to, and this sort of, it goes along not just about processes, but people and technology as well, a standard and systematic approach. And these themes that you can see in what we need to deliver our strategic ambitions very much pick up on those elements that I'd circled in red on the strategy ambitions. So next slide, please. So what I've really looked into is the current situation. And as I said, I started out looking at performance measurement. And when I looked at performance measurement around our asset management system, I found that most of the metrics that we had was about asset condition. We've got very little on process performance. And if you think, the simple definition of a process is you take an input, you do something which adds value to produce an outcome. Understanding what that value is that needs to be added by that process was something that we didn't really have very well described. So how can you measure a process performance if you can't describe the value that it should be adding? So that was a sort of a fundamental question that I started to identify from this work. We'd also found that we've got huge quantity of instruction manuals, essentially. Some were okay, but there was a lot of out-of-date stuff. And actually there was a lot of duplication. And when you say that, one role might have 150 instructions to follow, you start to see the problem. One activity, such as quite a straightforward one like grass cutting, had 150 pages worth of instructions for that, which this is a problem which I think has arisen through the complexity of the organisation, the number of people involved in doing everything in terms of writing documents and managing safety, managing reliability. So obviously that's quite a complicated picture that I think if we focus too much on the detail, which is what we try to do all the time, we end up with more detail. So we're trying to sort of like zoom out a bit and look at the processes and the ways of working to help solve that problem. Looking at the processes, as I said, we've got quite a lot, but we still have a sort of a bit of a legacy of the age of the organisation and the amount of people that have been involved over the years in developing our ways of working. So we've ended up with quite a few different versions of the truth. Ownership is something that is often unclear. So therefore, processes are hard to manage and change is hard to manage in terms of those processes. And finally, and this is the really important thing, understanding what people across the organisation, from leadership and managers to operators, wanted to see in relation to process mapping and modelling, was a really key area for me to have a look at to see what is actually going to be useful. Because whilst people might get enthusiastic about mapping processes or modelling processes, there needs to be a purpose to it. Otherwise, it's just more stuff to add to the overwhelming amount of information we already have. So actually really getting to grips with what different people want to see in terms of our process maps was also something I needed to really find out about in order to move this work forward. And so those are some of the things there that I found across a lot of the groups of people I spoke to. So next slide, please. So coming back to value, I talked obviously about how processes need to add value. We need to be able to measure that in order to manage them and to improve them. This is something that some of my colleagues have been doing in other teams in the asset management system. And this is about understanding basically the value proposition and the high level value stages, so that when we start to drill down into the individual processes and capabilities that we're delivering through those processes, and along with people and technology, we really understand what value applies to those particular value stages. So there's been quite a bit of work, and this is still ongoing, to really boil down those kind of value stages at a high level, and then to start to work out how we translate those to individual processes. We should have value streams. I think we shouldn't have that many, because they should be really focused on the kind of the high level deliverables for the organization, but we still need to be able to sort of find exactly what they are and describe them and what value we should be seeing in each stage, to then be able to measure value in our processes. Next slide, please. So this is an example of what we've started to see now through implementing the approach. We're a standardized approach to how we map our processes, and started to provide more of a framework to understand the purpose of the processes, the scope, the owners, who's going to be using it and for what purpose, as well as using a SIPOC template, essentially suppliers, inputs, processes in the middle, outcomes and customers. So everything around the actual process and what it's delivering. And that includes data in and data out, because we also want to understand how our data moves around our processes. So what we're ending up with in the bottom right hand of this slide is the maintenance process life cycle, with in the process itself, the swim lanes denoting the people involved. AIMS O&M is an asset information system operating and maintenance system, so it's an IT system. And obviously then you've still got the process flow as well in relation to the people doing it and the systems they're using. So that then becomes our as-is description of how we undertake the actual maintenance process. We would expect then to be able to, if there is more detail needed, start to drill down that detail from individual activities to maybe more detailed maps. And we also, I should say, also have in development of systems like AIMS O&M, we've often worked with suppliers and business analysts to produce very, very detailed process maps, a much more granular level of detail, which aren't necessarily very useful for process operators to be able to understand and get an overview of their process. So actually, this is helping to fill in that grey space between the high-level value chain, all the instructions and guidance that people have, all the detail that's around developing IT systems, that's at a more human level for people to be able to understand how they interact with the processes. And this process information log that has been created to go along with the process mapping will help to make sure that will be controlled documents, so we'll have version control of them, and we'll need to then use them together so that we've got a record of how our processes are looking. Next step, please, Cello. So in summary, there's really two things I've been talking about. Building knowledge about our processes is the first thing. And leadership and practitioner engagement is absolutely fundamental to that and has been. Building resources to build and maintain and manage the models is challenging when there's not a lot of money around. So one of the things I'm doing here is starting to build a community of practice. I've built a SharePoint site and some guidance. I found some training instructions and stuff online. Quite a lot of them are free as well for people to be able to refer to. Set a framework and standards. We're using the business BPMN. Can't quite remember what that stands for, but it's a standard approach notation for process mapping. And also providing support and advice and coordination. We've got a catalogue of process maps that we're now starting to get approved versions of so that people can refer to what already exists and how it links to the processes they might be working on and where they might want to refer to it. And then defining value in a way that we can measure it in our processes. So next slide, please. So as I say, the next stage of it is really starting to build resources to review and improve the processes, manage that change, have prioritized approach to reviewing and improving the processes, and then measuring value so that we can then optimize that and then use that to inform our priorities for where we need to make improvements. I think that's the next slide. I think that's the last slide. Yeah, so my lessons learned, there's loads of them, and please feel free to reach out to me if you want to kind of, find out any more. But know the purpose of what you want to use the process modeling for is really fundamental, because otherwise you're just creating more stuff. And that's certainly true in our organisation. It's never right first time, and it's all a learning process. So you never stop learning about your processes, and you'll never get it right first time, and that's okay. That's what's expected. And when you're starting to map your as-is actual processes, make sure they're really as-is and not should be. A lot of the process maps that I found that are badged as as-is are actually, they don't bear any reality to how people are actually delivering the work on the ground, because they're either out of date or everybody's doing it differently because they're not practical processes. So there's quite a lot of discipline, I think, involved in saying, actually, let's be honest about how we do things, because we can't change from from a made up baseline. It has to be realistic. So I think that's the next slide is the Q&A final slide. This is just a little picture of a really small asset in my hometown that helps manage the Atlantic, which is just beyond those houses and that hill, from coming in and inundating the town, along with various other embankments and things in the town. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. And if there are any questions, give me just a second. If there are any questions for Suzanne, please ask the questions. Okay. The other thing I'm going to suggest is, if you have questions that you'd like to have answered later, just put them into the chat line, because we will save the chat line, and if we run out of time to answer questions. I don't see anything in the chat line right now for Suzanne. So in the interest of time, we'll go forward with the our next speaker. And thank you, Suzanne. Again, put things into the chat line. We keep talking about systems and systems thinking. In utilities, we have a couple of, we have physical systems that we manage, and then we have also the management of the utility itself. So the systems means it's a lot of components, and the component interaction between components is important. So the research projects that I've been lucky to work with focused on developing a framework for how utility and organization creates value. And that's when people when people execute processes that may be enabled by technologies, and also they can implement change. So you can see that the processes are central to the performance of utilities functions. So this is a result from a workshop that was 1 week, about 40 representatives from a lot of utilities. When we asked them, what are the challenges about these core functions like capital project delivery, asset management plans, and so forth? So their feedback was that what kept them up at night and what they were most worried about was people issues. That 46%, 43% of them were process, and 11% were issues that were because technology didn't work properly. So our next speaker is going to talk about an approach to this kind of framework and related to AI. So Mike, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Cello. And can you confirm you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So there are 3 major topics I want to talk about. One is with that introduction from Cello, how we align these AI methods that are available now and associated tools with the analysis and improvement methodology. And then I want to talk a little bit about the history and evolution of AI and address this issue of how do you really identify, what AI to use and where to use it. And then discuss how we can add value to utilities. Yeah, go ahead, Cello. Thank you. So as Cello showed, this people, process, and technology idea is very important. That gets represented in AIM, as you see on the right. AIM is the analysis and improvement methodology, and the tool that we use. The tool is at the very top of that image on the right, which is a process model, and the standard that we're using is shown in the lower left. That's the business process model and notation standard. It's an ISO standard now. And if you use this tool, one of the things that you need to represent and take some care in representing it are the decisions, which get represented as a combination of these tasks or activities, which are the rectangles, those yellow rectangles you see in the diagram on the lower left, and the gateways that take the results of those decisions and then route work differently based on some decision. So you'll see in many of these cases, there are one input and multiple outputs. Some decision was made to route work in a different way. And it's that decision that we want to focus on. This one in particular was the one we did for the Orange County, Florida, for inspecting a pump station. And if you go to the next slide, Cello, and I think that's a build slide, if you just hit the first button, you can go ahead and hit the right arrow or down arrow if you want, Cello. So what we've done here is just circled the gateways that get represented in this business process model and the activities that precede them in which some decision has occurred. So you can see, just read the text on those boxes, and I hope you can convince yourself that some sort of decision was made there, either by a machine automatically or by the people that were involved in that decision-making process. If you look at the one, and if you just hit the right arrow again, Cello, the circle in the lower left, it says evaluate recommendations. Now, this is a pump repair and replacement process. So clearly at that point, there's some evaluation of that recommendation. And I think that would involve some sort of business rules, some sort of logic that would have to be represented. And you'll notice a small icon in the top left corner of that rectangle, which looks like a table. That's the way you represent in BPMN that activity is mediated by some logic, some decision logic, some rules. And that's those are the kinds of tools that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about two different kinds of tools that you can use in order to represent those decisions. So, the takeaway from this slide is that once you get a sufficiently detailed BPMN model, you can isolate the decisions that you're making in whatever business process or operational process you're representing in this model. And then you can focus on what is required for that decision in terms of input, what it's created as output from that decision, and that's where you can make you can make your own decisions about where AI technology may or may not apply. So next slide, please, Cello. So let me talk about AI in general. When I started in this industry more than 35 years ago, the approach was what we would call symbolic. It was expert systems, it was business rules, and related technologies like that. And it's kind of hard to believe at this point, but at that time, the industry leaders were telling us that you have to tell the machine what to do. It's not going to learn it by itself. So there was an intense effort to try to understand technologies like expert systems, which are a collection of business rules, to make systems that acted intelligently, like for diagnosis of medical diseases and many, many other approaches. Now, I don't want to belittle those efforts or those technologies because they're very widely used and still used today and used very effectively. A key advantage of them is that they are entirely transparent. I know exactly what's happening inside that box into which my inputs come and outputs flow. And therefore, I can trust what's going on because I can inspect it. I can critique it. I can audit it. I can change it however I want. And there are very recent manifestations of that. There's a couple of book references. The one on the left, the Book of Why. It's a very readable book if you are interested about the new science of cause and effect analysis, which is a pretty intriguing notions by Judea Pearl, a professor at UCLA. So, if you're interested in those sort of symbolic kinds of approaches, understand them, know that they're still valuable and effective. If you're interested in causal inference, take a look at that book. But more recently, and even in the late 80s or 90s, this idea of modeling intelligence after the neural connections in a human brain gained some prominence. And it went through a series of transitions and some new technologies, and especially new powerful computing capabilities and scale. They developed into what is now the most dominant area within AI, machine learning, and the connection, the so-called connectionists. These are the people that really believe that with sufficient computing power and data, we can model anything. And if you want another readable book is this Genius Makers book by an author at the New York Times, which talks about the recent history of this. So you can get a good idea about that. And clearly with large language models and the things we've seen, they've been very good. So there's a lot to be gained there, a lot to be learned there, and it's a valuable technology. It's one possible problem is that it tends to be more black box, which we don't see what's going on inside. So there's in the industry, there's a major concern for safety, security, trust, bias that may occur as a result of using these kinds of models. So as in the water utility, we need to be careful about what problem we're trying to approach, how we're going to use this technology, and what questions we need to answer. Like, if we need to trust this entirely, we're going to have to, in some way, figure out how to make what's inside that box entirely transparent so that it's usable. Next slide, please, Cello. So now we need a model for decision making, right? And I like the slide that Cello showed before, which on the left-hand side, he had the physical systems like the collection systems, the treatment units. But there are other things that a water utility has to manage. It has to manage financial instruments, the bonds and the budgets and whatever you're working on. The human resources have to be coordinated. The systems, the computers, and any kind of other physical hardware that has to be maintained. All of those things are the stuff that we are tasked with managing. And that's on the left-hand side of this diagram. And then on the right-hand side is our how we make decisions. The very first thing that happens when we're making decisions is we have a goal in mind. I mean, if you think about it, any sort of decision you're making it relative to some important goal that you need to achieve or satisfy. So goals are very important. And then decisions you can think of as having two parts, one a situation part and one an action part. So we need to know, if we're going to achieve some goal, we need to know where we are. And especially in business, we have so much data, we don't really know all the time what situation we're in. So we have to measure what matters, and we have to understand what are our critical situations that we need to monitor. And then we can, as a result, we can take some action. And you'll notice on the left-hand side, I have these little orange triangles. Those are meant to represent the various things that we're tasked with managing. There's a little rectangle on the right-hand side. And I like, Cello likes to talk about this one, about a mechanic that's repairing a car. That car is on the left-hand side. And that mechanic that's working on the car, he has a couple of things in mind. He's got a model of what a car is and how it behaves. That's that little triangle on the right-hand side with the dashes. But he also has a management model about how he's going to fix what he finds is broken. What he finds is broken, those are the situations. And the actions he's going to take are those things that will repair the car. And he'll use the models effectively. And that happens a lot in water and wastewater utilities, where we have a lot of different models that may be used to assist in your decision making. So this is our model of decision making. Situations generate actions when we have a goal in mind. And the other thing to recognize is this is a cycle. So these are sequential decisions. You get new dynamic conditions come in. You make new decisions about what you're going to do about it. You intervene on those physical systems on the left, and that happens in a cycle over and over again. So now I want to just talk about two tools that are very practical, that are widely used, that you can apply in water utilities. One is called the decision modeling notation. And you notice it's got a similar name like business process modeling notation. These two standards were developed by the same organization, and they're meant to work together very, very closely. And the way you do this is that in the top right of this slide, you see what is a business part of a business process model in BPMN. And this was done for DC water. And what this is fairly typical, is that you'll start to see them represent decision trees as a sequence of these gateways. So each one of those gateways is a decision. They've got some data, and they decide how to act, and they come to some conclusion. Whenever you see that kind of a bunch of gateways chained together, that's a good opportunity to represent the decision in a decision table, which is shown in the lower right-hand corner of this. Graphically, that decision table is represented on the lower left, where all those ovals are the inputs, and they go into a set of rules which then get evaluated. So in that decision table, for each one of those inputs, you'll see a column. And then over on the right-hand side, you'll see a column that's labeled output action. And depending upon what data or input you can, you take some action. And this is perfectly general. So any of those inputs could come from some complex model. It could be a simple calculation. It could be a projection based on some elaborate model that's developed for the purpose of that input. So it's a very nice way of organizing the information about the business rules that you use within your business process model. So thinking back to that slide before where we had a BPMN diagram where we identified all those decisions, we could use this approach in order to capture those rules, as simple or as complex as they may be. Now, the other approach is a goal tree. You may have noticed in that decision model, we're cycling around and we're making these sequential decisions. One easy way to do that is to identify your goals. Those are the green things that you see on the top right. And then identify the decisions that are associated with those goals. Remember, we said the cycle was goal, decision, action. So we're in a cycle. And in a goal and decision tree, you identify each of your goals, and the goals can be subdivided, right? So I have a high level goal, and I can have many lower level goals, and in a tree-like structure. And then for each one of those goals, I make decisions. So it's kind of easy to represent that sequential decision logic, and put it into a tree. And then there are tools like you see in the bottom center, in order to enter how you make that decision, just as we did with the decision table. It's a different user interface, but the same concept. And then you can do things like do what-if simulations, test your decisions to see if they're going to work the way you want. Do they achieve the goals that you need to achieve? Do they provide you with the situational awareness that you really want to have at any point in time? And I hope this is a little bit of a nuance, but I hope you saw that those situations are things that could be undesirable. Those are risks. So if we use this one of these tools in our decision representation, in representing our decisions, we get information not just about situational awareness, but we get information about our current risk. At whatever level we decide to define this this goal tree. If you click the right-hand button, Cello, please. This is a goal tree that was developed for the Great Lakes Water Authority. The fellow that we were working with there found it very easy to just represent his goals. So they have a very high-level goal: reliable water and wastewater service to our customers with responsible energy usage. And he could divide that into many goals and sub-goals. And as he drilled down into that goal tree, it becomes more operational, right? So at the lower levels of our tree, they're very operational. And to each one of those goals, he could attach the decisions that were made in order to achieve those goals. And with this, then you could use a tool like is shown in the background to represent all of that information, decide what your inputs are. By the way, that should be in the BPMN diagram. So you don't have to worry about where you may have to worry about where the data comes from, but you know what it is. Okay, next slide, please, Cello. Last thing I want to say before we wrap up is where does this so-called generative AI sit in this constellation of ideas? Well, it's a language capability, right? And it requires input. And if you use this, I don't know how much you use it. I use it quite a lot. Things like Copilot or Gemini. There are some others that are very good at providing, acting like an assistant. given information that is contained in that large language model. What we have in the tools that you've just seen is an ability to pack all of what we know about our decisions into some kind of a structure, which we can then feed to one of these models and then do Q&A on our own private data. So the very nice thing about the analysis and improvement methodology, as Cello just introduced before, is that it's entirely transparent and it's an extremely good input to a large language model, so that for any utility, if they have gone through the trouble of using AIM to represent that information, there are methods, one of which you see here, for adding that information to a large language model, keeping it private, it's your own private data, so it's secure, and then doing Q&A with that generative AI capability to support your staff, to act as a co-pilot, to work together with to answer questions about the data you provide, either static data or even dynamic data. Okay, next slide, please, Cello. So what are our takeaways? Well, one is that all our business process models rely on effective, approved, consistently applied decisions. We have to, our decisions are sometimes too haphazard or they're wrong, but we need them to meet all these criteria. We need systems thinking. So just like we did with the business process models, we need to apply that same thinking to decisions. As I explained in the one slide, the issues of ethics, bias, the lack of explainability in AI are growing concerns that need to be addressed. And then the tools that we use, we have to measure what matters. Find the most important situations that translate into actions or generate actions to achieve those goals or satisfy those goals in a continuous cycle. And I hope you could see that the two tools that I showed can be used effectively to do just that. Most importantly, though, the AIM process is entirely transparent. It's a great way to represent what you know. And that's important because we need to understand it, but we can then also review it. We can audit it. We can critique it. And in the end, as a result of all of that, we can trust it. So there's the benefits, transparency of decisions. That's becoming more and more prominent every day. Clarity in the decision-making process. Get those decisions defined. Make sure those decisions are applied consistently. Do it efficiently using those tools so that you can modify things after you take a look at them and obtain consensus for what those decisions are. And we can use the new capabilities in AI for learning and adaptation to quickly adapt to changes. And I think the next slide, Cello, is our Q&A. These are just ticklers. We're really interested in getting feedback from you about what your challenges are. Is it just understanding what it is, making sure you've got the right data? Is it change management? Because these are sometimes disruptive technologies. Is it financial or human resource limitations or constraints? Are you worried about safety or security? If any of those things are of concern to you, we'd love to hear about it so we know where to focus energies around helping you out. And also, where are the opportunities that you think? Is it in the operations side of your business? Is it in the business management decisions? How would you use this co-pilot thing or any knowledge resource that you have? Is it good for customer relationship management? Is it good for just enabling staff? So those are just ideas. If you have more, post them in the chat or let's talk about it in the Q&A session. Cello, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Mike. I know that there was a bit of a, fire hose, perhaps. But if you have any questions or things you'd like to clarify, you can put it in the chat line now. You can raise your hand and let us know that you'd like to speak. Or if you can, after this, you can you know, just email me. My email address is here. The recording of this meeting will be, we had some people who really wanted to be here but were unable. So the video recording of this meeting will be posted, and all the people are going to get an email that's saying, okay, this is the link to YouTube video that has the, if you want to look through this again, if you didn't suffer enough during this first hour. So let me just open up and see if there are any questions. Okay. We have, Mike Sweeney. Mike, can you unmute and pose a question, please?
Yes, Mike and Suzanne, great presentations. Mike, if you can go to slide 29 real quick, or Cello for that matter.
Cello's got the controls here.
Okay. My question, I want to try to keep it brief because it could get really involved real quick. It just was triggered by, let's see, it's one of the decision blocks in terms of, nope.
No.
I'm sorry, maybe is that 30? Whatever, that's
yes,
that's the correct slide.
Yes.
Okay. With the one,
okay, it's either this or this.
The other one, 29.
Okay.
Okay. So where it says energy efficiency is improved, you have a decision for current performance assessed, decisions improvements identified, and targets set. My question is, that's still pretty broad. Do you see in the near term the capabilities getting more granular around those decisions?
Yes.
In other words, an introduction of best practices and things like that, some kind of AI related guidance that could go in to framing up the decision blocks themselves as represented here.
Yes. Yes, these are high level. They're meant to be, that was done deliberately. But the important point here is that any goal can be subdivided.
Understood.
So,
it's sort of illustrative. Okay.
Exactly. And that's exactly what one would do. If to get very exact, that's what you do. You flesh out the goals for a particular, typically for a particular role or
Gotcha.
person, and then you decide. You make define the goals and define the situations and actions associated, the decisions associated with each one of those goals. And you're very, very precise. We know exactly for each one of those decisions what the input data is and what the output data outputs should be, output actions should be.
Understood. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. And by the way, anything that we talked about here can be demonstrated. I know it is a lot of tooling that, like BPMN, and that we know requires some discussion and perhaps training. We can demo any of these.
I just wanted to, are there any other questions? Before we close, I just want to make one comment. Any other questions that we can answer? We talked several times about, quote, systems thinking. What does it really mean? It means that the people, the processes, and the technologies are all impact each other. So if on this slide, if you have on the left side, your is the way it is now, your processes, your technologies, the workforce, and the organization, when you make change to the process, it'll impact the technology, the people, the workforce, the organization. When you change technology, it'll impact the processes, it'll impact the workforce, it may impact the organization. When the workforce is changing, it also impacts all these other things. And it is the idea, or when the organization changes, it is the idea that these interactions need to be accounted for. They are really important. And we only have 4 minutes left. So
I think there's a question for
all,
Suzanne in here, Cello, in the chat.
Okay. What are the main benefits of using the SIPOC diagram before embarking on a process mapping activity? Yes, Suzanne.
I think the process obviously needs to represent reality, and it's very easy to, when you're mapping the process, to sort of to drift off a bit from the actual process, and actually the scope to creep, the start point, the end point to creep, etc. So it's useful to have the SIPOC in place because it really focuses you on the purpose of the process, the customers and the outputs. And it also, for other people who may be working on the process or picking up the information that you've captured about the process, to be able to see your thinking and your information, so you can help get people on the same page as you're doing the work and to get a consensus of what that scope is, as well as to be able to make it something that can be referenced by people working on different processes, upstream or downstream of the one that you're working on. And actually the outputs of a process that you may be working on should be the inputs of somebody else's. So that's where you start to be able to join together processes through those inputs and outputs. And similarly, thinking about how data goes through processes as well. Data inputs should, in most cases, have something done to them through the process in respect to what then comes out at the other end and how that might be used. So it's also helps to sort of to look at how you might want to add value to the data as well as to the asset or the other thing that other things that you might be producing, such as reports, etc., with the process.
Thank you. I don't see, yes, as I said, there will be, the video will be shared with everybody. And one more thing, we're planning the next meeting in late October, early November. And I think there'll be some, in particular, one presentation, again, will be on AI, on something very practical that is happening in the utility already. So just encourage you to, if you found this interesting, you may like the next one as well. Last chance before I, give me just 1 second. I will, any other questions? I don't see it. So I will stop recording just a second. So